Righty, welcome everybody. My name is Brady Werger. I am a 30-year-old white male with short brown hair, brown eyes, glasses, and a goatee. I am wearing a black shirt. Welcome to today's Capital Chat. Once again, my name is Brady Werger. I am currently the vice chair for the Iowa DD Council, and I want to welcome all of you to the June Capitals Chat. We are going to have a lot of good conversations today about several different topics. So I hope you all find that interesting. And if you have any questions about what we are talking about today, please put your questions in the chat or raise the hand function, and we will try to answer your questions as soon as we can. I do want to introduce Brooke Lovelace. Brooke is the director for the Iowa DD Council. Bill Collestead. Bill is the public policy manager for the Iowa DD Council. Amy Campbell, she does a lot of work at the Capitol as a lobbyist, and Emily with Capture Marketing. Also, I don't normally do this, but I am hoping to get reappointed in the month of July and take over the chair position for the Iowa DD Council, as hopefully he will be reappointed as well, and he will take over as the vice chair. So I look forward to working another couple years with the DD Council and taking more of a leadership role. So Bill, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brady. I'm going to actually pass it over to Amy, and then I'll go after that. So.
Amy, I think you're muted right now.
See, I was clicking so many things, I clicked myself muted. So it's going to be one of those days. So I'm glad everybody joined us today. So we weren't quite sure if we would have all the bills signed today by today, and they have been. So I just wanted to give a quick recap of the session. There were 1,370 bills introduced this year, and that does not include resolutions, and that does not include all the bills from last year that were introduced that became alive again for a while. So 1,370 this year, and of those 156 passed. So that's about 11%. So I always like to show those numbers because you have about a 1 in 10 chance of getting your bill passed. And sometimes it takes several years. Several of the bills passed this year were things that were in the works for many, many years. And so that's a pretty typical percentage numbers. We've seen as low as 9% and as high as 13% passage rates. I just always keep track of that. I've been doing that for 30 years. And so I just always kind of like to know if things change, if people, different legislators, different leaders, if that ever changes, different makeups of who's in charge, and it really doesn't. It's usually a pretty consistent number that get passed. This year also, when they close session down and after the governor's signing the budget this week, they're spending $8.2 billion, which is just about a 1% increase over last year. What's important is in Iowa, we have a law that says we can only spend 99% of what we take in. So it's good budgeting. Make sure you don't spend more than you have in your bank. And then you're also saving that other extra 1%. And we've been doing that for 3 decades. That's been a law for a while. But this year, we're taking in $9 billion. We have $9 billion that we could have spent, and the legislature chose to spend 91% of that. So not the full 99%. So you can see they're leaving about $800 million unspent, and they're saving that. what they're planning on doing is using that for the tax cuts that they passed this year. But I wanted to point that out because that was a choice that they made. They could have used that $800 million to put into Medicaid, to get rid of waiver waiting lists, to increase community capacity, to spend more on education, to do water, clean water, whatever their priorities might have been. That $800 million could have gone pretty far, but instead they chose to do tax cuts. So I always like to make that a point that we had more money available to spend. The choice was just made not to spend it. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill, who is going to talk a little bit of kind of refresh. I know some of you have been on the May one, so some of this might be, duplicative, but we just wanted to go over a couple of the highlights of this session that were signed into law.
Thank you, Amy. Again, I'm Bill Colstead. I'm the Public Policy Manager. I am also a middle-aged white male with a blue shirt, glasses, a very short haircut, some might call it bald, and then a beard. So I'm glad to be here today and to spend some time with you. Amy, just to clarify on that slide before, that $800 million that they didn't spend is in addition to the law where they have to save some money as well, set aside. So there's that money saved and then additional set aside for that tax, right? So I think she's giving me a thumbs up there and she's signed off. So these are the bills. We're pretty excited about these. I brought this up at our last meeting. Many of these, specifically, I'll start with the one that's on the bottom of the list, the newborn screening panel updates, was really brought forward by a number of family advocates and parents and people who had personal testimonies. Amy and I know we were in the small conference room as many of them gave their testimonies and what a difference that made to get that bill signed into law. But many of these, again, because we're driven and we're our council is tries to lift up self-advocates and put them in a position to empower and to share their story so that legislators can make decisions and laws on their behalf. And so a number of these were listed that way, but I'm not going to read all of them, but I'll just kind of point out that we did with the newborn screening panel updates, there was an increase for defining autism as a mental health condition. There was a lot of back and forth on the language on that. That's one of those that I think was one of those bills last year that wouldn't have made the 11% cut. It has been forming as they went forward. There were some tiered rates for psychiatric inpatient care, mental health professional loan repayments, which kind of gets at one of our priorities, which is trying to sustain the workforce. And then the special education task force for private school setting. That one I would just kind of point out that again, that's another one that was brought forward by families that were advocates that were really looking to make sure that things were fair and equal, whether they needed special education in school, that would be a public school or a private school, that those needs were addressed at both of those locations. So pretty excited that we had a number of bills signed into law that we were tracking and following. And so those are just kind of some highlights. Amy, you're on mute.
I tell you, it's going to be one of those days. I'm sorry, guys. So we wanted to kind of do a quick overview of the budgets because there was some really good information or good increases in the Medicaid budget this year. And as you know, with Glenwood closing, the state of Iowa is going to have to spend more money to make sure that people have options to live in home and community-based settings. Rather than the larger institutions. And so there were a number of things that legislators did to try to start that process this year. One of them, and this is further at the bottom, it doesn't cost any money, but it changed the definition and criteria for admissions to MHIs, to the mental health institutes of persons with intellectual disabilities. They want to make sure that it is an appropriate placement and that there really is no other alternatives in the community for that person. And so that's just a quick change to make sure DHS has a little bit more control over making sure that people aren't being sent to an institution that should have other options. They did increase a few items. One was $1.8 million increase for rural home healthcare providers. That's really important because you guys probably know how much gas is costing when you have people going out to people's homes in rural areas. You're driving farther and more miles to get between the people that you're working for. So that's really important for those providers so that they will not just give up during this time when it might cost more to drive somewhere than they're actually making. Also an increase of 1.4 million for intermediate care facilities for individuals with intellectual disabilities. So that was another increase for some of those higher needs individuals so that they could leave Glenwood and have an appropriate placement. Then there were a couple of more focused on children. There was an increase for applied behavioral analysis or ABA rates for individuals with autism, and a $1.3 million increase for behavioral health intervention services that are offered in PMICs is what they're called, psychiatric medical institutions for children. And so those were some of those down payments. One of the discussions early on was the House wanted to increase HCBS, home and community-based services waiver rates, as well as reduce the intellectual disability waiting list, the waiver waiting list. Those didn't make the budget this year, but DHS offered to use federal COVID relief funds under what's called the American Recovery Plan Act, or ARPA. Those are all those funds that the governor has. And DHS has a set amount on their own. And they found out that some of those funds that DHS has can be matched. So you can use it and get a federal Medicaid match. So they offered to use 14.6 million to increase the HCBS waivers, which Brooke, you heard was a little over 4%. Is that right?
Yes, 4.25.
Okay. So that increases those rates by 4.25%. These are one-time funds, so we will have to go back in as a state and add more money to the budget just to keep level funding that service. And then also they were going to take some individuals off the intellectual disability waiver waiting list. So that was $7.4 million. So it doesn't eliminate the waiting list, but it does decrease the number of people waiting for services on that. Bill, you want to cover this one?
Yeah, so thank you, Amy, one of our legislative priorities as the Iowa DD Council and self-advocates is around workforce. So these first three bullets we were pretty excited about. That's not only our legislative priority, I think that's a legislative priority of many advocacy groups for people in Iowa that have disabilities. And so the workforce, there was a $120,000 increase for vocational rehabilitation services, $520,000 for a new mental health professional loan repayment, which we talked about kind of stabilizing that workforce, and then 14 new psychiatric residences. And so those are key investments in the workforce, and we know that that's a struggle right now. There were also some additional final budgets that were approved, $200,000 to increase the AEA school-based mental health services, $10,000 for Best Buddies program. It was really kind of, we always bring this up, but the Best Buddies really had some inspirational conversations at the Capitol when that bill got passed, and Amy did a clip of some of that so that we kind of understand how long people kind of have worked on some of these advocacy points. There were increases at Glenwood and Woodward, and then there's some additional increases for DHS and Department of Health merger in the region. So those were some of the final budget line items. Anything else you'd add to that, Amy?
No, I was trying to respond to Marty's question about the ARPA funds, if they would be going directly to the MCO, and no, they are required to go directly to the providers. And in fact, it's to be used directly for wage increases. So those direct support staff, regardless of what their title is, it doesn't have to be a DSP title, but those people providing direct services or supervisors that are doing a lot of shifts and are doing a lot of direct services, it can only be used for increasing their wages. Some of it can be used for like the benefits package, but I think it's a small amount. So like maybe a 10% or 20%, but the full amount has to go directly to the workers.
Well,
And
Amy,
Amy, that does include CCO and CDAC as well, too.
Yes. And habilitation.
Yes.
And I think that's a good transition to our next slide. We're going to talk about the Department of Human Services. There's a lot going on. I know Brooke's going to cover that part, but some of these specific things are some of the things I think we're going to discuss here. So thank you, Brooke.
Good morning. I'm Brooke Lovelace. I'm the director of the DD Council. I am a white 51-year-old woman with, I guess, shoulder length blonde hair, fake blonde maybe, but I do have hair, unlike Bill, and I'm wearing glasses. And yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit, as I think Amy said, there has been a lot going on with DHS. Bill and I meet with DHS probably on a monthly basis just to stay updated with what's going on. And I think we posted a Facebook page that went out the 1st of June. It was talking about the statewide transition plan that the state released to have public comment on. And I think there was some questions about really what that plan is about. And so we did want to just briefly discuss that a little bit today because there were some questions about that. And so the statewide settings plan, this is actually a federal rule. So it's not something the state is doing. It's something that they're federally required to comply with. But it's a federal rule that actually came back out in 2014. But it gave the states a while to comply with it. But it's basically a rule that talks about your home and community-based services, how they need to be in the most integrated setting as possible. So if you're receiving residential services or employment services, those services cannot be provided in a facility if you're receiving Medicaid dollars. And so, as I mentioned, they've been giving the states a while to comply with this, to make sure that they're regulating this and looking at all the community services to make sure that they're in compliant. But then COVID happened, and so they were allowing the states a little bit more flexibility to be able to deal with that. But now the clock is back on, and I think everything needs to be in place by March of 2023. And so that huge plan that we put a link on, and I'll put that in the chat too, and I'm done here. It's just a chance for folks to provide some public comment on that. For the most part, having your services when you're receiving community services being in the most integrated setting makes sense. But there are some things that do have advocates worry about whether they're receiving the day services in the most integrated setting. And then there's also just making sure people still have a choice about where they receive their services and where they live. I mean, for the most part, the rule says you have a choice of where you live. But there are some folks that do live in what maybe called a disability-friendly community, where every apartment or townhome is a person with a disability, and they're worried that might not comply with the rule. And so is that really truly giving people a choice on where they live? And so that's something that's still up for debate. But lots of information there. But what good news is about that is that DHS will be doing a town hall meeting to kind of explain all of that, and they'll probably do a better job of than what I just did. But there'll be one that's going to be specifically geared for family members and for people who receive services. And so they haven't announced the date yet on that, but once that is announced, we'll get that information out for you. And then there'll be another town hall meeting then for providers. Just some other things going on quickly. People have heard that there's an evaluation that's happening to look at all of the waivers, to make changes, to make them more effective, and to really be able to serve people in the community. And it's called, it's Mathematica is the company that's doing that. Just a little bit of background information on that. There's been some self-advocates during some of the DHS town hall meetings that have said, hey, are they looking at case management? Because that's really where some of the problems are. And this evaluation is over a year span to make these recommendations. And the Medicaid department actually hears advocates that there's some issues with case management and wants to start making those changes now. So the Medicaid department will be doing some focus groups throughout the summer with case managers to talk about some of the training issues and to figure out how to better improve case management for folks. And so there will be some opportunity to hopefully participate in some of those too, and to fix that case management system. I think we already talked about the 4.25 increase. Amy mentioned that is supposed to go through the MCO, or not go to directly to the MCOs. It's supposed to go to the providers, and there is actually language in their contract to make sure that happens. And then there's also going to be perhaps some audits to make sure that the providers are actually increasing wages to make sure that it goes directly to the people providing the service. Waiting list, I think the amount Amy gave was 7.9. They are expecting that to take some folks off the waiting list, but it's projected that's only going to be about 100 to 200 people that are going to come off the ID waiting list. So that's going to be something that the council is going to continue to advocate for this next legislative session, is that we need to do more to reduce those waiting lists. But then, the workforce also needs to be addressed. Lastly, I think just the Glenwood closing, that's still a topic that we continue to monitor and visit with about DHS to make sure people are having a choice on where they transition to if they're living in Glenwood. People have heard in our previous capital chats, Glenwood is closing and will be officially close the doors in 2 years. There will be a provider fair for family members in July, and there's information on that on their DHS website. Some other things they're using ARPA dollars for with the Glenwood closing is that folks can get additional home and vehicle modifications if they need that to move into a community setting that goes above and beyond what they currently are receiving. And I think that's all of the stuff I wanted to cover. And then I will put that link again to that state plan, transition plan in the chat in case people did not see our Facebook post. And I think we're going back to Amy, or is it Bill?
I think it is Amy, and I just wanted to reemphasize one more time, Brooke, and you did a great job covering it in the sense that just remind people those town halls, we get a lot of positive feedback from the town halls, DHSs, putting the information out there in a few different ways. The report that Brooke's going to share is a more detailed written report, but they're also having the town halls where they're receiving feedback. And and as Brooke said, we have been meeting with them. We really appreciate, and I think providers have been really appreciating, and families, the transparency and the information. And so they're not always where they want to be yet, and they're still moving forward, but it's a great way to stay informed, those reports that are out there. So if you're ever looking for them, a lot of times they're on our website, whether it's the Infinite website or on our DD Council website, or if you're on our Facebook page, we try to put those links and keep those current when they are coming forward. So I just wanted to reemphasize that point if people could join those. So thank you, Amy. You're next, I think.
Well, I thought I would just pause here for a second because we're going to transition to talking about the what happened during the primaries. And I just wanted to stop and see if anybody had any questions either on the DHS updates or what happened with session.
Well, I have another question. Why do I always have questions? Glenwood. So do we know, are these the people who are currently at Glenwood are going to have a choice? But what about, do they have they're being paid for by some county from region at this point. Are they going to have to go back to the region that they, so to speak, came from, or are they really going to have a choice to be wherever in the state appeals to them? I mean, I think particularly about people who've been there for decades and may have, originally had a family that, was in a particular part of the state, but they really don't have any connections back there anymore.
Do you want me to take that, Amy? What we're hearing, when this came out, is they were tracking to see, giving people, asking everybody that is still in Glenwood where was their choice to live. And a majority of them did choose to stick around in that same area. And so they've been having conversations with providers about expanding, if it's providers that are not in the area, expanding their services to go over into that area. But there were some folks that wanted to move closer to Des Moines or closer from maybe where their family members are. But most is what we're hearing is that they're trying to really stick with the choice of where that person wants to go and making sure that the providers can meet that need. And I think, that's part of the, why it's going to take 2 years for this to happen, because, they can't move 150 people out tomorrow. And so that's part of why hopefully they're doing some careful planning on that. And then providers, we have heard there's at least 11 providers that have come to the table that said that they are willing to expand and possibly even to that part of the state. So I think, the providers have really stepped up. And the regions really, I don't think have much of a say in it now, because their services are being paid for by the state.
Okay.
The state is covering the Medicaid services, but I mean, the regions are still a partner, because they oversee the providers in their region as well too. But
but I thought maybe that there was some region money going into well, anyhow, that's good. So really most of the people at this point want to stay in that southwestern Iowa kind of area.
Oh, I don't know if I would say most of them, but there was a lot of them that did.
Okay. Well, I'm glad.
Because that's what they know. I mean,
right, exactly.
Exactly.
If that's where you've been for decades, do you really have any sense of what it might be like in the rest of the state? Well, anyhow, thanks, Brooke.
Yeah, and Marty, also, I know some of the regions are concerned that if there are a lot of people located, like county or Johnson County or something, whether that would create issues with workforce for those that are being served by the region, because you only have so many workers and there's already a shortage. But I think that all of that kind of will get worked out in the next, year as they plan. Brady, did you have a comment? I don't know who had.
Yeah. Hold on one second. So, Marty, my name is Brady Werger, and I'm the vice chair currently for the DD Council. And I used to live up at the Glenwood Resource Center. Now I'm in their Community 8 CBS waiver program. But, it's unfortunate that Glenwood has to close. But, there's a lot of good things about, this happening is, we're trying to provide more opportunities for clients in institutionalized settings to move into the community of their choice. And I've been advocating to get more homes within Glenwood, Council Bluffs area through our 8 CBS waiver program with the Resource Center. And I do believe that we plan on expanding. My family's from Northeast Iowa and Waverly. So I am planning within the next 4 weeks to move back to another home in the Waverly area. But when it comes down to the clients at the Resource Center and their team talking about, what's next for those clients, the social workers and the teams are really, if it's a client that's able to voice their opinion on what they want. They're really trying to promote and help them to receive, where does this individual want to live? And so these teams are really trying to work with the clients to allow them to move in the community of their choice. And for the clients that, aren't able to speak for themselves, it's a struggle, but we are trying to support them the best way we can to move them into the community that they will be the most successful in. So I don't know if that answers some more of your questions, but I just kind of wanted to give you a perspective from somebody that's gone through living at the resource center and living in the HCBS waiver programs. 'Cause sometimes it's good to hear from people that's gone through it. So
Thank you. It is very good to hear that. Thank you.
yep.
Thank you. You're up.
Oh, thank you. I just had a quick follow-up. I asked that question about the Medicaid eligibility for employed people with disabilities. Literally right after the last capital chat, I got a letter from DHS explaining it. So that was very helpful, though.
That's good.
Hmm.
All right, Paula, you're next.
Yes, hi. Can you share what your conversations have been with DHS about providing additional, maybe enhanced services would be a good word for it, for those individuals that are going to have a lot of challenges living in the community? Is there a long-term plan in place to continue those services, or is that just an initial, let's settle them in the community? And then,
Paul, I'm sorry, Paul, were you talking about the ones that are transitioning from Glenwood or?
well, this time particularly from Glenwood, but I do think there are a lot of individuals that fall in that category that really need enhanced services in order to live as independently as they can in the community.
Yeah, our conversations so far have just been that they did get approval for ARPA funds to use those as folks transition to do those expanded services, but we haven't talked further about what the long-term plan is, and that's kind of similar to what has happened under, money follows the person. Those services were also short-term services. But I think, the state's going to be working with the managed care companies, or, if they are DHS consumers, on how, if the person needs those services, how do they continue? But some of those, I think most of the ARPA funds they're talking about are one-time costs, like if they need like plexiglass windows put in their apartment, or, some type of more accessible van needs to be modified than what's allowable now by the dollar limits. I think that's what they're looking at right now, using the ARPA funds for.
That's what I was afraid of. I do think that we need to do further advocacy. I've always thought about that as not only a parent of someone who would need those extra supports, but being on the Money Follows the Person committee, I've always thought it was very short-sighted that we spend this money and get individuals settled in the community, and then maintaining those services to make them successful is always a huge challenge. So just curious.
Brooke, I would add, I know that at our last council meeting, Director Garcia came and spoke to the council, and that overall plan, while that's not specific to the closing of Glenwood, but there is a part of that where she talked about looking to invest in some ongoing specific training for behavioral support training, which I do think supports people in the community a little bit differently. And that seemed like a more pointed and direct service. And then the second thing is kind of looking at some kind of emergency respite service. And I know as providers, I've heard that really being something that, when you're having someone who's really in crisis, just getting a little bit of relief if they're in a small group setting, or if they're out in the community having a place for respite. But I know that's a little bit different from that overall question that Paula had. specific to that one, but I do think it enhances services.
And I think that's the whole plan with this Mathematica evaluation they're doing, is that they recognize that there needs to be changes. There's, there's some people that are on the waiting list that just need, like Bill says, a little bit of respite. So how can we make that happen? And there's other folks that are on the waiver that need, a bunch of tons of services. And how do we meet those needs? And there's got to be some type of way to, instead of just have everybody be on the waiting list and you're not really sure how much dollars are going to cost for each one of those persons. There has to be a better way, a better system. And I think that's part of their plan, is to figure that out with this evaluation. We hope.
All right, well, seeing no other comments, I'm gonna just do a quick review of the primary. I hope everybody got a chance to vote in the primary. There were several races that were very, very close. So I think that continues a trend that we've been seeing, is that every vote really does count. And so this was the highest primary election voter turnout since 2010. Most of it was on the Republican side. Several close races were less than 25 votes. One, Representative Charlie McClintock, who has only been, he just served his first term, lost by 2 votes. But just yesterday, they announced after a hand count that he actually had won. One thing that's in common with all of these people on the list is, you probably read about, the governor endorsed several people running against current legislators because of their resistance to school vouchers. And so these all were people that the governor had endorsed their opponents. There is one outstanding race right now in the Grimes area. It's a new district in Grimes, Polk City, Northern Polk. It's House District 46. There were 5 Republican candidates running, and none of them got the 30, I can't remember what percent, 35% they needed to be able to be elected or become the nominee. So they have to go to a convention to pick the candidate. So that's one race that's not yet decided. But then you will see that there are 5 current state representatives who lost, 3 of whom were running against a fellow. They got redistricted together and nobody moved. So Representative Lee Hine, who is the chair of Ways and Means, which is the tax committee, lost to Representative Steve Bradley, who's a dentist from up in the northeast corner of the state, kind of by Dyersville and Dubuque. Representative Jeff Mitchell lost to Representative Jeff Shipley. That's kind of the Fairfield area. Representative Dave Maxwell lost to Representative Dean Fisher. That's in the Grinnell area. Representative John Thorup lost to Barb, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, Nif McCullough, I think it is. And then Representative Dustin Haidt, who's, I think he's from, not Ottumwa, I think Oskaloosa, I think, or maybe it's Ottumwa. I think it's Ottumwa. He lost to Helena Hayes, and he was the chair of the education committee and was also against the school voucher issue. So you can kind of see where the trends on that were. But all in all, there's going to be like 40 new faces, 40 to 45 new faces in the legislature, more if incumbents lose. So it's a great time to start thinking about meeting the people running for office. One of the things that we're going to do is we will create a listing where you can get more information on each candidate running for the legislature and in Congress. And then also we're going to come up with some questions, or a question to ask the people running for Congress and maybe the governor. We haven't really decided which races, but and have those available in InfoNet or on our website so that you can see responses to questions about disability issues. So keep an eye out for that this summer. We'll be working on that as soon as Bill and I have a chance to talk about what questions we're going to ask them. we had some pretty good response from that a few years ago when we had a competitive governor's race and some congressional races that were pretty heated. So we're hoping we'll get them to respond again. It's a lot of work to get them to respond, but they do eventually if you keep bugging them.
So Amy, kind of to connect that a little bit, especially with the election coming up in November, at our Make Your Mark conference, the Secretary of State, along with the legislators, we're going to have a legislative panel, but we're also going to have the Secretary of State's office come and do a presentation on voting and getting connected to voting. But we're also going to have that connected a little bit, I think, with a panel around advocacy and getting involved. Yesterday, the DD Council had an opportunity to go speak with all of the county auditors. They were having their summer conference, and had a chance to go up there and speak in connection to, this is kind of a neat thing that they're doing, but they put out a grant. Let me kind of explain it. The Secretary of State office put a grant out to all the county auditors that they could apply to make, to go through a process and receive some money and some funds to continue to invest in making voting more accessible. And it's a pretty broad grant, meaning that they can apply and say, this is how we think we can make our office more accessible, or our voting sites more accessible, or this is the way we'd want to go about doing it. But what I really like about the grant, they had connected with us and our self-advocates to design it. And really what they're looking to do is, for example, bringing a group of self-advocates to their election sites and seeing what that site looks like through their eyes, instead of just trying to make it accessible and from their perspective, meaning the county auditor's perspective, they're actually, the detail of the grant is they have to reach out to a self-advocacy group or a group of self-advocates in their county and start working with them collectively to kind of make their site more accessible. And so one of the examples that I had suggested they think about is, really kind of setting up a field trip and going to each site, having a group of people with lived experience with disabilities and going actually out to their site. So we had an opportunity to kind of connect with them yesterday and speak in front of them to kind of share what the DD Council does and how we can partner with them to make sure that voting is accessible. But I was also really inspired by their commitment to continue to make voting more important. And so one of the things that I did get feedback from the county auditors is they said that they still believe in their areas that people really don't have enough information about curbside voting, and it's not used. But absentee ballots, they did reduce the number of days it takes to mail that in, and they also expressed that's really been a challenge to get those in. In the primary, there were a number of votes that didn't make it and didn't get counted. So they felt like if we can do some more advocacy around curbside voting, that would be important. So we continue to appreciate that relationship, working with them to make sure that all votes are counted. So. Did we lose Amy? Oh, there she is. I see her now. So is there some more questions, Brooke, in the, no? Any additional questions for us today?
I'm not seeing anybody with their hand raised. Just while we're waiting to see if people have some questions, Bill had mentioned our Make Your Mark conference. I'm not sure if we said the dates of it, or maybe you did, but I'll tell you again anyway. It's always good to hear it twice. There should be the registration should open up here, not next week, but the week after. And the dates are September 14th and 15th this year, and we'll be at Prairie Meadows in Altoona. Well, are there any, I guess we maybe did lose Amy. And our next capital chat we said is August. We're skipping the month of July. And I believe it's August 26th. Is that correct?
That sounds right.
It's the last Friday of the month.
What was the date on that again, Brooke?
August 26th.
Yep, August 26th at 11.
Well, I guess we could get everybody 10 minutes of their time back on this Friday if there's no further questions.
Thank you for joining us. Have a great end of June here and a happy 4th.
Happy 4th of July, everyone.
Bye, guys.